air was sharp and intensely cold, carrying the clean, biting scent of pine and high altitude. Adam cut the engine, and the silence descended immediately, thick and isolating. He and Charlie were perched halfway up the ridge overlooking Mirror Lake, a dark, perfectly still expanse of water reflecting the bruised twilight sky. Their job was simple: emergency repair on a defunct cellular repeater tower, a structural failure that needed immediate attention. "Look at that," Charlie muttered, nodding toward the lakeshore. "Amateurs." Below them, on a small exposed clearing near the black edge of the water, a group of 5 figures was setting up camp. They were loud, dressed in brightly colored synthetic gear, their presence a jarring intrusion into the profound silence of the wilderness. Adam counted them: 4 college students, 2 young men and 2 young women, and 1 older man, clearly their instructor. The group moved with the casual inefficiency of those who underestimate the mountains. Adam watched as they ignored the most obvious warning: a thick, squat pillar of concrete near the lake, supporting a badly rusted metal sign. The sign was tilted and covered in ancient grime. The red paint almost entirely flaked away, but the message, whatever it was clearly meant to deter visitors. The students set up their tents mere feet from it. "They're shooting some documentary probably," Adam commented, pulling on his thermal gloves. "Look at the boom mic setup. They're too focused on the screen to see the environment." "And they're too close to the water," Charlie added, shivering. "This lake gives me the creeps, Adam. It doesn't move. It's too perfect." The older man, Dr. Alastair, a professor whose tweed jacket looked comically out of place, organized the students. One of the young men quickly built a large bonfire. As the flames roared to life, casting flickering light across the clearing, the group huddled around it, pulling out cameras and notebooks. "The history of regional mythologies," Dr. Alastair announced to his students, his voice carrying faintly on the still air. "We're here to document the local accounts of unexplained disappearances in the area, the very stories the Forest Service dismisses as folklore." Adam and Charlie turned away from the camp. They had a structural failure to fix. The repeater tower was a cold, skeletal frame of twisted steel behind them. "I'll take the main power conduit on the south side," Adam instructed, pulling out his heavy-duty cutters. "You check the signal relay housing, Charlie. Let's get this done before that fog rolls in." As Adam began stripping the main power feed, the air around the base of the tower felt unnaturally cold, heavier than the surrounding environment. He glanced back down at the students. The firelight was bright, deceptive, illuminating their false sense of safety. The students were laughing now, the conversation lively, completely oblivious to the silent, rusted warning sign they had chosen as the centerpiece of their camp. The water of Mirror Lake remained absolutely still, reflecting the fire and the darkening sky with cold, profound indifference. Adam was halfway through securing the main power conduit when Charlie, who had been focused on the signal relay, let out a sharp, choked noise. "Adam, look! Below!" Adam paused his work, looking down toward the camp. The fire was still roaring, but the atmosphere had changed. The students were no longer laughing. They were gathered near the edge of the water, rigid with shock. Mark, one of the male students, had separated from the group. He was walking slowly, hesitantly, toward the shoreline, drawn by something only he could see. His powerful headlamp cut a shaky beam across the still surface of Mirror Lake. As Mark reached the muddy bank, the lake surface, which had been reflecting the chaotic firelight, instantly turned flat. It became an expanse of absolute, polished blackness, absorbing the light completely, reflecting nothing. It transformed into a perfect, terrifying, black mirror. Mark stopped, staring down into the unnatural void. The surface remained still for a moment. Then, impossibly, a reflection began to form. It was not the reflection of the fire, the trees, or the surrounding hills. It was Mark's own face, rendered in hyper-real detail on the black water. But the reflection was wrong. Terribly wrong. The image of Mark in the water was staring back at him with pure, searing rage. The reflection's mouth was twisted into a silent, unnatural sneer, and its eyes, dark, malevolent voids, held no flicker of the confusion visible on the real Mark's face. The reflected Mark was utterly fixed, utterly malicious, refusing to mimic the movements of the living man. The other students, 2 standing, 1 filming frantically, and Dr. Alastair, began shouting warnings, but the sound seemed choked by the cold air. Mark, paralyzed by the sight, took 1 involuntary step backward, and as he did, the reflection did not follow. Instead, the face in the black water grew monstrously large. The features swelled and elongated, distorting into a massive, terrifying mask of resentment and frozen anger, expanding rapidly to fill the entire black expanse of the lake surface. The massive, rage-filled reflection of Mark's face began to move. The dark surface of the water rippled, not from wind, but from a deliberate, internal motion. The gargantuan, distorted reflection of Mark's face began to lift and stretch toward the living Mark.
An immense spectral hand, a colossal image of Mark's own limb, but formed of the terrifying black water, rose from the surface of the lake. It was wet, cold, and massive, reaching across the shore with agonizing slowness toward the paralyzed student. Dr. Allister finally broke free from his shock and lunged toward Mark, screaming a warning that was lost in the cold night air. Dr. Allister's lunge was futile. The colossal, spectral hand of black water reached the shore, and with terrifying speed, it clamped down on Mark's ankle. Mark let out a final thin shriek that was instantly swallowed by the cold air. He was violently yanked off his feet and dragged screaming across the mud. The water closed over him without a ripple, returning instantly to its perfect, unnaturally black stillness. Mark was gone. The entire camp exploded into chaos. The firelight flickered wildly over the faces of the remaining students. "Mark! Mark!" One of the male students, David, screamed, running toward the water's edge, followed closely by Lisa, one of the female students. They reached the bank where the black mirror remained motionless. David stared down, his chest heaving, prepared to dive in. He stopped dead. Lisa stopped beside him, her hand flying to her mouth to stifle a hysterical cry. The surface of Mirror Lake remained absolutely flat, unnaturally black, and immediately began to offer new reflections. It wasn't just Mark's reflection it held theirs. David and Lisa stared down at their own images on the black water. For a terrifying brief instant, the reflections looked normal. Then, the transformation began. The faces staring back at them began to mutate. The skin stretched and blackened, the features elongating into horrifying, silent masks of fury. Massive obsidian black horns sprouted from their foreheads, and their mouths twisted into gaping, monstrous snarls. The reflections were no longer human. They were giant, demonic monster forms, silent and terrifyingly still, waiting beneath the surface. Lisa stumbled backward, horrified, pointing a trembling finger at the water. "Professor, your face! Look!" Dr. Allister, rooted to the ground near the bonfire, forced himself to look down at the exposed patch of wet mud reflecting the firelight. His own image, the academic's tired face, was already hardening, the skin darkening, forming the initial grotesque, horned outline of a waiting predator. The terror was profound. The lake wasn't a mirror of what they were. It was a mirror of what the entity wanted them to become. Up on the ridge, Adam watched the chaos through the binoculars, his entire professional composure shattering. He saw the violent pull, the vanishing scream, and now the paralyzed terror of the survivors staring at the water. Charlie was already scrambling backward towards the safety of the truck. "Charlie, what the hell is that?" Charlie whispered, his voice cracking. "That's not a drowning, It's a structural failure," Adam finished, his voice cold and flat, but vibrating with profound shock. "The sign, the warning. The lake isn't reflecting light, it's reflecting malice." The students were trapped on the shore, terrified to move, facing the realization that the entity wasn't chasing them. It was already inside the reflection, waiting. The realization was the trigger. As the monstrous reflections fully formed, black, horned, and silently enraged, the attack resumed with terrifying speed. The black mirror beneath David and Lisa suddenly shattered its stillness. The colossal obsidian hand of David's reflection erupted from the water's surface. It moved with unnatural speed, bypassing defense, and slammed against the real David's head. The force was sickening, concussive, and focused entirely on psychological trauma. David didn't have time to scream. His body went rigid, his eyes wide in a final agonizing expression of utter disbelief and pain. He was hauled forward, his limp form dragged effortlessly into the black, sucking water. The lake consumed him instantly. "David!" Lisa shrieked, stumbling backward into the professor. She couldn't process the death, only the violent, sudden void it created. She didn't get far. Her own reflection, the monstrous female form, erupted from the surface where David had vanished. This time, the attack was subtler, but equally devastating. The black-clawed hand snatched at Lisa's chest, grabbing not her clothing, but her heart. Lisa gasped, a raw, terrible sound of sudden internal trauma. Her eyes rolled back as the unseen power crushed her spirit. She collapsed backward on the cold, damp earth, her body seizing in a silent, violent fit. The reflection dragged her unconscious form into the lake with the same ruthless efficiency. The chaos at the shore stopped. 4 students were gone, consumed by the malicious mirror. Dr. Alistair was screaming, a high, broken, hysterical sound that finally cut through the silence of the wilderness. He fell to his knees, clutching his head, completely defeated by the horrifying structural failure that was devouring his team. The remaining student, Sarah, the other female, stood rooted near the roaring bonfire, watching the black mirror. Her face was a mask of shock, tears streaming silently down her cheeks. The water remained perfectly still, now reflecting only the massive, terrifying images of the 2 waiting reflections, the professor's and hers. Up on the ridge, Adam lowered the binoculars, his hand shaking violently, the lenses cold against his face. He and Charlie had witnessed 5 brutal minutes of total, incomprehensible destruction. "They're all gone," Charlie whispered, his voice cracking, looking desperately toward the safety of the truck. "We need to go. We need to leave now, Adam. We have a working truck." Adam didn't move. He looked at the vast, silent black lake, and then at the professor, screaming helplessly on the shore. He was the Phixer. He specialized in structural failures. This wasn't a haunting. It was a physical, psychic trap using the environment as its weapon. And the last remaining people were facing imminent consumption. "No," Adam said, his voice flat with terrible resolve. He strapped his heavy tool belt back on. "The structural integrity of this area is failing catastrophically. The entity is feeding. If we leave now, the professor dies, and whatever took them comes for us eventually. We have to intervene. We have to fight the reflection. We have to intervene. We have to fight the reflection." Adam threw the binoculars aside. He didn't wait for Charlie's protest. He was already scrambling down the uneven, snow-dusted slope of the ridge. Charlie, faced with the terrifying choice of descending the treacherous incline or being left alone with the knowledge of the lakeside massacre, followed immediately. The run was brutal, fueled by adrenaline and the chilling certainty of the danger below. They crashed through the undergrowth, the frozen pine needles stinging their faces. As they neared the clearing, the intense, chaotic flickering of the bonfire provided a terrible beacon. Dr. Alistair was still on his knees, his screams reduced to ragged, choking sobs of pure terror. Sarah, the final female student, stood motionless facing the black water, her own reflection, horned and monstrous, waiting silently for her collapse. "Sarah, get away from the water!" Adam roared, his voice raw, cutting through the silence of the scene. The sound of Adam's voice was the unexpected rupture the entity hadn't accounted for. Sarah's vacant stare broke. She snapped out of her trance, turning her terrified gaze towards the running men. The monstrous reflection in the lake reacted instantly. The massive, horned image of Sarah in the water surged, and its enormous black obsidian hand erupted from the surface, snatching the air where the real Sarah had been standing moments before. Adam reached the shore first, moving with the brutal efficiency of the Phixer responding to a system failure. He didn't stop. He tackled Sarah, shoving her bodily away from the snatching reflection, sending them both tumbling back toward the safety of the blazing bonfire. Charlie, meanwhile, reached Dr. Alistair. The professor was a dead weight of terror and exhaustion. Charlie grabbed him under the arms and dragged the older man roughly away from the dangerous shoreline, ignoring his frantic protests and sobs. The entity raged. The black water of Mirror Lake exploded, not with spray, but with massive, soundless surges of dark, solidified energy, slamming the shore where they had stood. The monstrous reflections, the 4 students and the professor, were gone, the surface reverting to the unnaturally flat, silent black mirror, waiting for their return. Adam hauled Sarah to her feet. She was shaking violently but conscious. Dr. Alistair, now yards away from the water, collapsed onto the dirt, completely broken. "We need to move, now!" Adam yelled, scanning the silent woods. "The truck! We take the truck and leave the tower for the police!" The rescue had been successful. The 4 survivors, Adam, Charlie, Sarah, and the professor, were together. They had escaped the initial trap. The terrifying silence of the woods seemed to offer a brief, desperate window of escape. They turned their backs on the black water, the heat of the roaring fire a temporary shield, and began stumbling toward the relative safety of the ridge where Adam's truck was parked. "We take the truck and leave the tower for the police!" Adam, Sarah, and Dr. Alastair scrambled away from the shoreline, the heat of the bonfire a fading comfort. They didn't run toward the truck yet. They needed to clear the immediate danger zone. Charlie, however, lagging slightly behind, couldn't resist. Driven by a terrible, fatal curiosity, he stole a glance back over his shoulder at the black, motionless surface of Mirror Lake. The mirror instantly came alive for him. His reflection monster, massive, horned and enraged, formed on the surface with lightning speed. It didn't wait. It launched its attack immediately. A colossal, dark, spectral hand erupted from the water directly toward Charlie. Charlie yelled, a sharp, choked sound of pure shock, instinctively throwing his arm up to defend himself. The immense black, icy hand clamped down, not on his wrist, but on his forearm. The pressure was agonizing and brief. The hand left behind a deep, bleeding scratch, a physical injury proving the contact was real before the invisible force violently yanked Charlie off his feet toward the water. Adam spun at the sound of Charlie's cry and saw the horrific scene. His friend was dragged screaming across the pine needles toward the water. "Charlie, no!" Adam roared, lunging forward, his hand outstretched.
He was too late. The black water closed instantly and silently over Charlie's struggling form. The surface returned to its perfect, unnaturally still state. Charlie was gone. The loss was immediate, brutal, and final. Adam collapsed at the shoreline, his fist slamming uselessly into the mud. Sarah stood rigid, her hands covering her mouth, letting out a soft, continuous whimper of unbearable trauma. But as Adam stared into the terrifying black mirror, the surface offered its final, most devastating truth. The water didn't reflect the sky or the fire, it reflected the structural reality beneath. The blackness of the surface receded, becoming momentarily transparent. Beneath the water, lying at a profound depth, Adam, Sarah, and Dr. Alastair saw it. A gigantic, rusted iron cage. A massive, intricate pindra, constructed of thick, dark metal bars, anchored deep into the sediment of the lake bed. It was ancient, huge, and undeniably real, and the cage was not empty. Inside the terrifying confines of the cage, suspended in the cold, clear water, were 4 figures. They were still alive, motionless but conscious, their eyes wide and staring up at the surface. Adam recognized them instantly. Mark, David, Lisa, and now Charlie. They were not drowned, they were trapped. Their bodies were covered in severe, inexplicable injuries, clearly victims of the unseen kinetic force. The horrifying realization struck Adam with the force of a physical blow. The lake wasn't a site of consumption, it was a site of collection. The entity wasn't killing them, it was imprisoning them, keeping them alive and terrorized in a structural trap. The reflections were the bait, and the lake was the lock. The surface snapped back to its obsidian blackness, hiding the terrible vision, but the truth was out. The terrifying vision of the massive submerged iron cage, with Charlie and their friends trapped, alive and conscious, erased any thought of escape. Adam scrambled backward from the water's edge, hauling Sarah and the paralyzed professor away from the obsidian mirror. The horror was no longer the suddenness of death, it was the chilling certainty of their prolonged, imprisoned agony. "They're alive," Sarah whispered, her voice a reedy thread of disbelief and renewed terror. "They're alive, and they're down there. The reflections weren't killers, they were prison guards." Dr. Alastair, witnessing the ultimate structural failure of reality, the visible cage, suffered a second, deeper mental break. He stopped moving, sitting heavily on the ground, rocking gently and murmuring disjointed historical dates to himself, completely detached from the present horror. Adam ignored the professor's collapse. His focus was cold, surgical, and absolute. The entity was not a mindless predator, it was a collector that had built a complex, enormous trap, and Adam was the fixer. He specialized in structural failure. "We don't run," Adam stated, his voice flat with terrifying resolve. He gripped Sarah's arm, forcing her to look at him. "They're not drowned, they're contained. That cage is a physical object. The lake is the lock." They retreated quickly, painfully, stumbling up the ridge towards the safety of the repeater tower. The ascent was slow, arduous, and fueled by a terrible new purpose. Sarah, though traumatized, had a core of fierce determination. "We need the tower," Adam continued as they climbed, his side burning with pain. "The beacon system, the satellite link. We need to call in a rescue team. But we can't tell them about the reflections or the entity. They won't believe us.
They'll send search and rescue, not recovery specialists. They'll just find a deep lake, she choked out, tears of frustration and terror streaming down her cheeks. That's exactly, Adam agreed, reaching the relative shelter of the tower's base. Our story has to be clean, but we won't wait for them. I can't rely on outside help for this. I need to find the weakness in the cage of structure. I need schematics, metallurgy, anything to understand how to break it. He looked at the towering steel structure above them, its aerials reaching into the high, cold sky. He suddenly realized the answer. The tower, Adam whispered, tapping the cold steel support column. It's built to transmit power and signal across impossible distances. We don't need to call in a rescue team. We need to weaponize the tower. We need to find a way to overload the energy grid, to create an electromagnetic pulse strong enough to destroy the cage's locking mechanism, or use the sonic capabilities of the old array to shatter the anchors. The structural failure was immense, but Adam had now a blueprint for the counterattack. The goal for Part 2 was set: turn the abandoned communications tower into a massive, desperate rescue device. We need to weaponize the tower. Adam led the two survivors into the cramped utility room beneath the tower's base. Using a clean rag from his pack, he stabilized Sarah's shock and examined her minor scrapes. Dr. Alistair sat huddled against a cold equipment case, rocking quietly, still trapped in the despair of his failed expedition. Adam found a thick coil of electrical tape and secured his own heavy pry bar near the door, a necessary anchor to reality.
The remaining hours before dawn were spent in a tense, freezing vigil. Adam meticulously detailed the plan to Sarah, relying on her professional knowledge of the tower's infrastructure. They talked about grounding systems, power flow, and the obsolete sonic capabilities of the old array. "It's not magic, Sarah," Adam whispered, his voice low and clinical, fighting the trauma. "It's a structural energy failure tied to the environment. The entity isn't the lake. The lake is a filter. The water's perfect stillness allows it to act as a psychic conductor." He tapped the cold floor. "The reflection isn't a ghost. It's a dimensional weakness. The lake surface mirrors the darkest part of your mind, giving the entity the energy needed to manifest a physical attack and drag you across the barrier. The reflections were the keys to the cage. By breaking the stillness, we break the entity's ability to pull them across the dimensional threshold." Sarah stared at the cold steel door, her face drawn. "But why the cage? Why keep them alive?" "Because," Adam explained, "the energy is drawn from their sustained fear and despair. The cage is a battery. The longer they are trapped, terrified, and alive, the stronger the entity becomes. It's an unsustainable, terrible structural design." As Adam spoke, the utility room slowly filled with the pale, cold light of the rising sun. The dawn was magnificent, painting the vast, empty mountain peaks in hues of soft pink and white. Adam walked to the small, reinforced window and looked out over the plateau. The immense, terrifying mirror lake was now visible, its surface calm, quiet, and absolutely beautiful under the early light. The water was clear, reflecting the peaceful sky with cold, profound innocence. The silence was perfect. It was the deepest denial of the horror hidden just meters below the surface. Adam looked at his own reflection in the dusty glass, scarred, tired, but resolute. He knew the cage was still down there, filled with suffering. The beauty of the morning was the entity's most dangerous facade. He turned back to Sarah, a flicker of fierce determination in his eyes. "We need to finish what we started. We need to weaponize this tower and break that lock." The first phase was over. The Phixer had the blueprint. The cage is still down there. Tell us in the comments, what is the only thing that can break a monster's reflection?